in a needle, you have a chip that is capable of reading vessels, signals, electrical signals from a vessel. I mean, that's kind of science fiction. The engineering is so high that even if you wanted to reverse engineer the product, it would be just impossible because you don't have the tools.
Anything about longevity? Any companies dealing with that?
These companies need to show the investors and the potential buyers that the device or the molecule works in humans.
Why all these MedTech startups trying to focus on Latin America market? And I know you also work in Eastern Europe and Australia.
First in human trial is something that allows you as a startup to gather the data that you need to speak with these stakeholders, including the FDA. A trend that very few people know about, and it's just amazing what they can do for oncology, for cardiovascular care, for neurology. It's an ophthalmology company that is working on a technology, on a device, to change the color of your eyes.
Welcome. This is an Hour of Innovation podcast. I'm your host, Vitaliy Lyoshin. Today's guest is Julio Martinez-Clark, CEO of Bioaccess, a company that helps MedTech startups bring their innovations to market through clinical trials in emerging markets. We will talk about global clinical trials, first-in-human studies, equitable access to innovation, and the future of MedTech. Welcome, Julio. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Vit, for having me here on the show. It's a pleasure to share my knowledge and experience with your audience.
Yeah, that's great to have you here. Before we jump to the topics, can you share, please, a little bit about your background and the work that you do today?
Yes, Vit. I was born and raised in Colombia, South America, and I left the country around 1995 or so, actually before that, but I officially finished my studies in Bogota, Colombia. I did electrical engineering and I worked for a few years in Bogota, but before that I kind of spent my childhood in Jersey, in the United States. But I officially moved for a job in the US around 1995. I work in telecom and networking. I work for Lucent and Nortel, big telecom and networking companies, global companies at that time. And I got my MBA in Boston, and I have led teams of consultants in telecom and networking, and also sales teams in distribution networks in Latin America. And I joined forces with my brother Pedro, who is a physician. He trained as a cardiologist and then interventional cardiologist at the Harvard Medical School at the Beth Israel Medical Center in Boston. And he became a professor at the University of Miami after that. And he started working with his mentor, Dr. William O'Neill, who is one of the top authorities in interventional cardiology in the country and also in the world. And they started advising many U.S. medical device startups that were developing advanced cardiovascular technologies. And they saw the need to have a contract research organization because they were doing this work, this first-in-human work, inside the university ecosystem, and it wasn't really enough to serve the needs of these companies, and they decided to create a company outside of the university as a CRO, contract research organization that was solely focused on helping U.S. medical device startups with their first-in-human early feasibility clinical research in Latin America.
I see. Okay, so that's a perfect transition then. My first question is, why all these MedTech startups trying to focus on Latin America market? And I know you also work in Eastern Europe and Australia, maybe some other places. Why those markets specifically?
Well, but what happens is that these startups, MedTech and biopharma, we work in those two spaces. Our experience has been mostly on MedTech, but very recently we expanded our operations to the regions that you just mentioned, Australia and Eastern Europe, the Balkans more specifically. And also we expanded our services to biopharma companies because they also have the same need as MedTech companies. And we are also looking for more places where these companies can activate sites very quickly, way faster than in the United States. Because these companies, they really, really struggle when they finish their animal testing and they're ready to embark in the journey of planning a first-in-human clinical trial. These trials are very pivotal for these companies, and they are called many ways. Phase 1 in biopharma or biotech, first-in-human in medtech, also early stage, early phase, early feasibility, proof of concept is all the same thing. Basically, it's the first experience that a startup has on a live clinical setting in live patients, live humans. So it really sets the tone for the future of the startup because they have been working for many, many years developing the molecule or the device, and they raised money and they have an ambitious plan, a business plan, and certain milestones to hit and value inflection points for their investors and also for their strategics. Strategics means the companies that they are trying to sell the company to. It's really key for the audience to understand that these companies are created to be sold. They're not created to sell products. They are created to be acquired eventually by the big players, Medtronic, Boston Scientific, Johnson & Johnson, and biopharma, of course, Merck, Pfizer, the big pharma guys. So these companies need to show the investors and the potential buyers that the device or the molecule works in humans. So in the United States, it's really expensive. It's really difficult to recruit patients. And it's very uncertain to get these trials approved at the FDA, especially now with the political changes that are happening in the country and the layoffs at the FDA. So these companies are pretty much forced to go overseas. So they explore places in Eastern Europe, Australia, and Latin America because these countries have very fast approval pathways for these countries. These countries really want these startups to settle in the country and do the trials in the country because they understand the benefit, the financial benefit, the patient benefit, and the transfer of knowledge that happens when these startups come and work alongside the local investigators. Because these startups are created by some of the top minds in the industry. I mean, people from Stanford, from Harvard, from MIT, from many top universities in the US and Western Europe, they develop these technologies and they issue patents on these technologies because they really start inside the university labs, research labs. And then the startup is created by licensing those technologies from the university. So what I'm trying to say is that these startups really, really struggle to do these trials in their home countries, and they are forced to go overseas.
I see. And then some startups may go to foreign country to recruit people to do the studies and stuff like that. But then what kind of risks associated with that if they're going to come back to US and somehow trying to prove those results? Isn't US will require to do it in US anyways? How does it work?
Well,
how risky is that?
Yes, that's a good question. We're talking about two different things. One thing is to do the first in human or phase 1 or early feasibility or proof of concept study outside of the United States. Another thing is to do the pivotal study in the United States, which is equivalent to what people know in pharma as phase 2. So in other words, the FDA requires you to do a study in the United States. Yes, that's correct. But that's the pivotal study for a startup, for a MedTech, for a medical device startup. For pharma, they required a phase 3 study. There's a lot more testing in pharma. Don't ask me why, but that's the way it is. Anyway, so the point is that, the first in human can be done outside of the country, and you use that data to show your investors that the technology works or the molecule works, so you raise more funds. You also show your strategics, your potential buyers, that you are preparing yourself for an acquisition, that they are that you are developing a product that they want, and the product is already tested in humans and it works. So they get more interested and they sign agreements. Sometimes the buyers, the strategics, finance your pivotal study in the United States because you are de-risking the investment that they're making. You're taking all the risk by raising funds, building the team, by creating the startup in Delaware, whatever, licensing the technology. You're doing all the heavy lifting, and you're making things a lot easier and de-risking the investment for Merck or Pfizer or Medtronic or Boston Scientific. So the first in human trial is something that allows you as a startup to gather the data that you need to speak with these stakeholders, including the FDA. But the conversation with the FDA is about, listen, look at the results of my study in Colombia, in Panama, in the Dominican Republic. All the patients were treated, 20 patients. The results are satisfactory or very good, very promising. My follow-up was 6 months, 8 months, a year. Sometimes you even design the first in human with the input from the FDA before you activate a site in the Dominican Republic, for example. So the FDA is telling you how they want to see the first in human. And also your strategic tells you how they want to see the first in human. So you design the first in human from starting from the end in mind, from forward to backwards, right? So you design for what they need, exactly. So when you speak with the investors, when you speak with the strategics, when you speak with the FDA, they are going to see that you are delivering on what you promised based on the agreement that you had with them. And they're going to be happy to allow you to submit an application, in the case of medical devices, for an IDE study, which is it's called Investigational Device Exemption. That's an IDE. That's a submission that you do at the FDA so that the FDA allows you to do a larger study in the United States. So that's the data from that big study. That's the data that you use to get approval for commercialization, for sales in the United States. Is that clear?
I see. Yes. So it's basically, like you said, it's reducing risk, and because it's faster, it's less bureaucracy. You can do that really quick, and then still you're gonna go through the US approvals and everything.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Okay. And just to clarify a bit, on that pivotal study, you can also negotiate with the FDA a percentage of the clinical data that can come from overseas. The FDA will likely say to you, all right, your first in human was great. I love the results. So we would like you to do a pivotal, multi-centric, 20 sites, 200 patients in the United States, but you're only allowed to activate 20% of your sites in Latin America, for example, outside of the country. The rest, the 80%, the other 80% has to be from the United States. But you're still saving money and time with that 20% being done overseas.
Sure. Okay. Do you have types of startups, maybe something interesting that they're developing? Is it like hardware devices for certain things, or like specific medical equipment for hospitals? Just to give an idea of what kind of startups are we talking about?
Yeah, they are usually implantable devices, high risk, class 3, PMA, pre-market authorization. That's FDA terminology to define high-risk devices, basically. And they are implanted usually in an OR, an operating room. And they stay usually on the patient's body for many years or forever, depending on the study, depending on the device. But usually there are implantable devices, very advanced technologies. The technologies are so advanced that there's really nothing else out there similar to that, because that's the only reason these companies exist a bit. Because if you come up with a very innovative product, the investors will of course, invest in your company. If you come up with a very common Me Too product, then you're going to have difficulty finding money, right? Because
Sure.
as people say in the real estate business, if the deal is good, the money will follow, right? So if you have a very promising startup with a very innovative device or molecule, then the investors are going to be all over you, after you, because they want to make money, because they know that they're going to be able to sell the company to the big strategics, the big buyers.
Sure, sure. And all those implants, are there like some sort of monitoring and sensors, or are they more like
yeah, therapeutic. They're mostly therapeutic.
Okay.
Yes, we don't get many diagnostic or monitoring devices. They're mostly therapeutic. I mean, for example, heart valves, repair systems or replacement systems, catheters, stents, orthopedic implants to fix the knee, to fix the back pain, to alleviate back pain. Neurology devices to fix something in the brain, ophthalmology devices. For example, we're dealing with a company out of Connecticut who is working on a very innovative device to treat presbycia, which is something that you develop when you get older. After 40 years old, pretty much everybody gets presbycia, and you have to use glasses to read. It's impossible for you to read closer. So this is very innovative. I mean, there's really no other solution out there other than wearing glasses.
Yeah. In fact, this is funny that you just said that, because last week I went to my eye doctor for annual exam, and they prescribed me my first reading glasses. And that's exactly what she told me. Like,
yes.
that's the limit, like 40 years.
Exactly. That's kind of on the mark. I mean, that's usually very exact. It happened to me too. At 40 years, I started having difficulty reading. You can tell when you take your cell phone and you do like this, like very far, then you're like, oh, but something's going on.
Right.
When you go to a restaurant and you cannot read the bill, and you need to give it to somebody else to tell you how much the amount is, then you're having issues with your eyes.
Yes. Okay. Well, that's great. All these companies exist, and they have opportunity to innovate and help us, basically. Yeah.
Yes.
So,
yes.
You also talked a little bit about equitable access to innovation. Can you elaborate on this and explain to us how does it look in practice?
Yes. What happens, Vid, is that the big players in the medical device and pharmaceutical industry, they divide the world basically in two, right? Sales-wise, I'm talking about when they do a business plan, their markets are either North America, Europe, and Japan. Sometimes, if they are very adventurous, they get into China, but that's a difficult endeavor. That's another conversation. But usually they target very few big markets in the world where they want to sell their products because that's where the bulk of the population is. However, Latin America is usually left behind, or some countries in Africa or Asia, they're left, or the Middle East, they're left behind because they are not really interesting markets. There's really not much money to be spent on healthcare in those markets. So they divide the world into the big markets and rest of the world. So the rest of the world is really opportunistic. In other words, companies don't really plan to sell their products in the rest of the world. They are kind of in a passive mode. If I meet a distributor at a trade show, at an event, and that distributor is from Colombia, for example, and he loves my product, and he wants to pay for the registration, for the market clearance, and the market analysis and research that needs to happen in the country to sell the product. Sure, I sign their contract, and if they buy from me, fantastic. If they don't, who cares? Because I'm already selling in Europe and North America and Japan. I'm already making my money. So that's why you don't see much availability of medical innovation in those developing markets in the rest of the world. Because, as I said, it's very opportunistic. So patients suffer. Patients don't really have access to these advanced technologies. I would probably say that a very small percentage, probably 10% or 20% or so, of the FDA-approved products are available in South America, for example, because there's really no interest unless a distributor, as I alluded to, finds a company at a trade show. Anyway, the point is that patients that are participating in a clinical trial get to have fast access, early access to these advanced technologies because the first in human is being done on a very unique, very innovative device or molecule that hasn't been used in the world. So the patients in the country where the clinical trial is taking place, the first in human at least, are going to benefit from that early access to technologies.
I see. So it's also helping. But what about long term? Those technologies, if they do this first in human trial, they don't stay in the country anyways. Once they go through all the stages, they still focus on these big markets.
Yes, unfortunately, that's what happened. But they don't stay in the country. Human trials are usually small. I mean, first in human trials, early stage trials are usually small, 10, 20, 30 patients, no more than that. So only a handful, only a few patients in the country benefit from the study. I mean, in a country like Brazil, if you do a first in human, 30 patients, I mean, it's just a minuscule percentage of the overall 250 million people that are in Brazil. So not everybody benefits. So unfortunately, really, there's really no obligation that these companies have to make the technology available because it's a business deal.
Right.
They're not interested in selling the technology in that country. That's why they focus on the big markets.
Yeah, I understand there is a business driver there that companies sell where people have money, and in poorer countries, people don't necessarily have money for this, and that's why it's not there. And government probably doesn't even have money to help them out and purchase things like that.
Exactly. Even though some countries have something that is called, but it's not that common, but some countries do. It's called patient access or compassionate care. It has different names, but that basically allows a physician to prescribe a drug or medical device to a patient when the product is not available in the local market, even though it's not approved in the local market. The physician can go work with the regulator to issue an order to bring the product from overseas.
I see. Okay. And then do you think, or maybe you talked with some people or some companies, maybe brainstorming something, what can be changed in that? Can they maybe like reduce the price or find how to make the technologies cheaper or how to motivate other businesses to expand to Latin America and Africa and other places?
That's a very good question. I wish I had the answer, to be honest with you. I think clinical trials are a good way to contribute to that, so that patients have access. I mean, the more clinical trials a country receives, the better it is for the local population. The more the impact is in the local economy, and patients will have faster access to different type of technologies and molecules, etc. So governments can attract more clinical trials, and they're doing it. I mean, a lot of countries, at least in Latin America, where I usually focus my work, I've seen that they are enacting new laws to bring more and more clinical research because they recognize the value, all the benefits that clinical research brings to a country. I mean, as I said, there's a advanced transfer of knowledge. The patients have early access to advanced medical innovations. The physicians, the investigators benefit from this interaction with these top minds from developed countries, and they get to publish. So they become rock stars in their communities and also internationally. And also the money that these trials bring to a country creates higher paying jobs because you need higher profile people to engage as investigators, as study coordinators, as research assistants, et cetera, in these clinical trials. So that brings a lot of high paying jobs, which benefits everybody in the community.
So the hope is that over time, this maybe number of startups or number of these opportunities grows and it expands. Or also maybe when these startups either get acquired or get more investors' money, they can kind of like maybe do more studies there and benefit more people there.
Yes. Also, you're bringing up a good point. Besides governments making trials easier in their local countries, they can also make the regulatory laws easier for these companies to expand to those markets. I mean, the barriers of entry can be lower a little bit. For example, if I have a medical device manufacturer, if I already have FDA approval, why do you have to go through a very rigorous process to get market clearance in Brazil, in Mexico, if I already have reference country approval? I mean, the FDA is one of the top reference agencies in the world. So just make it easier for me so that your patients have fast access. Don't make me wait for months and months, sometimes a year or two in Brazil, and make me spend money in consultants and paperwork, translations, and have to submit 500 pages of documentation. I mean, it doesn't really make much sense, to be honest with
you. Yeah, I understand. I see, and maybe FDA or some other health organizations can help with that. We have a World Health Organization, for example, that could also promote this and go to governments and say, hey, how can we kind of like share these technologies and help out people?
Exactly. The key word that they use for that is harmonization. How do we harmonize the requirements? How do we recognize the approvals in other countries, right? So that's a trend. It's happening, but it's not happening as fast as we all want it to happen. I mean, in Europe it's happening. I mean, the European Union created a huge economic bloc that recognizes different approvals and all that.
Yeah, that would be good if they can find a way to work together.
Exactly. But in the case of Latin America, for example, you have a huge region, over 670 million people, and you have over 33 countries, if I remember correctly. I mean, so it's very fragmented. So you have to go country by country. Each country has different laws. You have to get a distributor in each one of these countries. So it's just too fragmented.
Yeah. And then back to your company, you help startups to go through this bureaucratical process, I guess, to break through these barriers, right, into the country and recruit patients and set it up. Okay.
That's exactly what we do, Bit. We help these companies strategize the best country where they can approve the study fast, because speed is the name of the game. We help these companies find the hospitals that have the patients that they need and the investigator that is willing and able to lead this study. We help these companies with the translation of all the documentation to submit to the local institutional review boards, IRBs or ethics committees, and also national regulatory agency approvals. Most of the countries require a two-step process: the IRB approval at the hospital and then the national Ministry of Health approval. And or regulatory agency, same thing. So it's usually sequential approval. We help with all that. We also help with obtaining the import permit that you need to import, nationalize the products, investigative, the experimental products into the country, because that's a special regime. I mean, you're bringing a certain lot of products. It's a limited quantity of products just for the trial. You cannot bring less or more, and there are controls to avoid black market and stuff for those investigational products. And also we help manage the study to make sure the hospital is recruiting. We meet with the hospital and the investigator every week to be on top of recruitment goals and to fix anything that is wrong with recruitment, and also to organize the procedures, the implantation procedure in the case of medical devices, because when there is an implantation procedure, usually the team from the startup company, usually from the US or Western Europe, they travel together, 3 to 5 people, and they scrub in, they get into the OR with the local investigator, and they assist the local investigator with the procedure.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
so it's a big effort to put everybody together and to coordinate everybody's schedule, the patient schedules, the investigators' schedule, the research staff schedule, the team from the US or Western Europe schedule. So it's just a very laborious team effort to make sure we get implantations in the case of medical devices. So we assist with all that, logistics, transportation, hotels, and then all the reporting that needs to happen, because if there's an adverse event, we need to report it to the authorities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. And then another question I have is about IP and protecting the intellectual property behind those innovations. Like you said, it could be device, it could be molecule. How do they protect it? How do they ensure that it doesn't get stolen or it doesn't get like reverse engineered and produced for cheaper price, if you will, something like that?
Yeah, that's a very important question, Vit. Well, first of all, there is a harmonization around the world about intellectual property protection. So when you file for a patent in the US, I think there's something called the Madrid Protocol or agreement or something that basically says if you file a patent in the United States or in Europe, you're covered in all the countries that are part of the Madrid Protocol. So if you do a trial in a country that is part of the Madrid Protocol, then you are safe. However, and of course, everybody has is under NDA, non-disclosure agreements. Everybody has to sign a non-disclosure agreement. So at least you have some legal protection that if somebody does something weird, you can go after them. And also, it's going to sound funny, but it's just really, really difficult to reverse engineer these products, to be honest with you. I've been in this business for about 20 years, and the research behind these products and the money behind these products is so huge that and the talent, the mind, that is just unavailable to have the talent in developing countries, to have the manufacturing capabilities, how to make devices so small and so precise. So the engineering is so high that even if you wanted to reverse engineer the product, it would be just impossible because you don't have the tools locally. I mean, if it is a Me Too product, if it's just a scalpel or something, yeah, sure, you can do it probably anywhere in any developing country. But if it is a highly complex product, especially if it has software with artificial intelligence and things like that, it's going to be really, really tough for you to reverse engineer that.
Yeah, I can imagine. And yeah, so you mentioned artificial intelligence. I have to ask, some of those products, they use artificial intelligence. Can you say in which way are they being like trained on certain things and then like using it, or they're actually collecting data and like monitoring devices?
Yeah, well, I've seen a few products that from companies that have been our clients that are robotics devices. In other words, they are trying to replicate what a human does with a robot, and that robot has artificial intelligence. We had a case of a company that developed this dental device to do the crowns. And it was a beautiful product, and they had robotics and artificial intelligence embedded in the console. You had the console, and then the console had an arm that gets into your mouth and does the procedure. But the console has all the intelligence to move the mouth to move the arm, your mouth, and the
I
tools
see.
in your mouth. We also were involved in a product that is for colonoscopy. It is colonoscopy procedures are uncomfortable for the operator, for the physician. They are very uncomfortable for the patient, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it has many problems. But if you robotize the procedure, it gets really, really easy to do for the operator and also for the patient. So it's a win-win when you use a robotic arm. For example, when you have an operator doing colonoscopy, they have to lift this heavy device and trying to maneuver the device inside the patient's body. And that movement is, I mean, you get really, really tired after a few minutes. But if you have a robot doing that, then you just watch.
Yeah, I see. Okay. Yeah, that's cool because I know there are some companies like even Neuralink, what they're doing with like brain implants and correcting like vision and other senses. And I've heard of other companies doing some implants like that they can replace body parts like arms and legs, for example. So people, with disabilities like that have full capabilities or close to full capabilities pretty much. So that's pretty cool to see how we can have now, we can now leverage artificial intelligence and build those devices and help people out. So that's very
Absolutely.
nice.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also there are many diagnostic products with artificial intelligence, but that's another category. Yeah.
Yeah. And then for the molecule startups that you have, are there like vaccine developers, or they're also like a drug developers for some like rare diseases maybe
They
or
are
things like
mostly,
that?
yes, they are mostly drug developers for rare diseases. They are developing radiopharmaceuticals, for example, where you have radioactive material. We're setting up a program in South America at a large hospital. We're going to bring a cyclotron to that facility so that we can do first in human testing with radiopharmaceuticals and theranostics, which is a combination of different methodologies, including radiopharmaceuticals. So yeah, I mean, advanced biopharma companies. The vaccine world is something else. We don't want to get into that because that's already an established industry. We always want to be different. We have to get into spaces where nobody else has ever been before.
Okay, so you've been working with all the startups for like a couple of decades, you mentioned. Do you see any sort of trend, or where does it go, and what technologies do you think will be used more and more in coming years, let's say like 5 to 10 years, that you see based on who you deal
Yeah.
with, basically, who you work with?
Yes, I see a lot of robotics combined with artificial intelligence, as I just mentioned. That's an up trend. Every day I see something else. I also see smaller devices, things that would be impossible to do 10 years ago. I mean, in a needle, you have a chip that is capable of reading vessels, signals, electrical signals from a vessel. I mean, that's kind of science fiction. We see also a big trend on brain-computer interfaces. We're working with a company called Asoft. It's a company that is a spin-off of Harvard University Labs. And they are doing with us a study in Panama. This is public information, it's all over the news. And they have been very, very successful in recruiting patients at the hospital, the Panama Clinic Hospital in Panama City. And they are developing a groundbreaking technology to have brain-computer interfaces, similar to the Neuralink. And that's a big future, big trend also. And of course, the diagnostic devices where you see now iPads with a transducer where you can just do an echo at the
Mm-hmm.
point of care. Before, you needed to have a big machine to do echoes, and you have these huge waiting lists, and they're expensive. And about 50% of the patients that you send to cardiac echoes, they don't really need echoes. So
Mm-hmm.
if you have a small device where you can do with artificial intelligence cardiac studies at the point of care, where any assistant, anybody, any primary care physician without any cardiovascular training can do the echo. Imagine a remote clinic in a rural area. So then you're
Yeah.
going to be able to screen patients with a small device, a small iPad, and see if they have a heart condition that suggests that the patient should be in the big city for an echo. So you don't
Mm-hmm.
send patients to the big city for echoes that are unnecessary. So you're saving a lot of money and resources, etc.
Right. Are there anything about longevity? Any companies dealing with that?
Longevity, for implantable devices, I haven't seen anything yet, to be honest with you. I saw a company, it's an ophthalmology company that is working on a technology, on a device to change the color of your eyes. But that's more aesthetic. It's more in the beauty
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
industry, right? It's not in the longevity industry. Because for longevity, there isn't really solid research on many things that are out there.
Yeah.
There are a lot of charlatans. There's a lot of pseudoscience. Um, I once was involved in a groundbreaking clinical trial from a top researcher who developed this technique to lengthen your telomeres.
Mm-hmm.
Telomeres are part of your genes, and if your telomeres are short, it's because you're aging. If they're long, it's because you're younger, basically. That's the theory.
Mm-hmm.
So he developed this adenovirus that with an IV infusion, you bring it to the body, and then you are able to lengthen the telomeres of the patient. So that's groundbreaking
Mm-hmm.
technology for longevity.
Yeah. Yeah, because I read a lot of news and high tech stuff or whatever, the high medical stuff or whatever they call it, about take this medication or take this supplement or try this diet, try that diet. And even have a couple of books I read about it. So it's interesting how people in the last maybe 10, 20 years moving into that
Yes,
industry and thinking about all this stuff and trying different things. And I'm curious if there are any.
exactly. Yes,
Yeah,
yeah, because
yeah,
now aging is considered a disease, the
yeah,
disease of
right.
aging. So if you
Yeah.
treat it as a disease, then things get a little different from
Mm-hmm.
before. Before, we thought that aging was just natural. Everybody ages and you
Yeah.
die. But yeah, that's true. But if you can treat aging as a disease, as something that is damaged, as cancer, as a tumor,
Mm-hmm.
then you have a different mindset to approach the research and the therapies. Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe I don't know. I don't have any medical education whatsoever. Maybe it's to some degree true. I don't know. But I guess reframing this problem and looking at it in a different angle may open up some opportunities for some startups to develop something. Like people
Yes.
before used to live 40 years old, and then 50, and then
Exactly.
60. Now, like we see
Yeah.
more and more people reaching 100. So who
Exactly.
knows?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But going back to your question, the other technology that I see that is really making an impact is radiopharmaceuticals.
Mm-hmm.
That's a trend that very few people know about, and I've seen it firsthand, and it's just amazing what they can do for oncology, for cardiovascular care, for neurology. Those are the three big applications for radiopharmaceuticals and theranostics. Radiopharmaceuticals and theranostics. That's an up and coming area. I mean, there
Mm-hmm.
are about 600 molecules for radiopharmaceutical drugs coming up or in
Mm-hmm.
development. That's
Wow.
a huge number.
Yeah, that's a big number. Yeah. Okay. Well, we're coming to an end here, and at the end, I just wanted to ask you if we haven't discussed something and you wanted to um, send a message to the audience. Feel free to say that.
Yes, Vid. I think the key message here for U.S. and Western European startup companies, MedTech or biopharma, is that there are places where you can accelerate your first in human trial if you know where to go, who to talk to. Don't make the rookie mistakes that many companies do. They sometimes pick sites that are really unfit for their studies. They get kind of enamored or in love with an investigator because the CEO of the company knows the investigator or have some type of relationship, and the investigator brings the trial to his clinic, and he promises that he can get approval really fast and recruit patients, and that is not always the case. I've had many instances where I had to intervene to rescue trials that started on the wrong path, on the wrong direction. So just ask professionals, contact CROs that specialize in early feasibility clinical research work, and look at your options and seek local help. I mean, there's really nothing like having an independent, objective, local person or company who can guide you in the right direction, especially if you're navigating the waters of Eastern Europe or Australia or Latin America when you don't know many people and you don't really know how things are done. So yeah, seek local help and explore options.
Yeah, that makes sense. Experts should help out and not, and sometimes it's
Yeah.
easier to delegate and be safe.
Exactly. That's the reason why CROs exist, because you outsource to professionals the execution of a clinical trial. You don't try to do it on your own, because your job as a medical device startup is to develop the product, not to execute clinical trials.
Yeah.
Two different jobs. That's why there's a big trend to outsource the execution of clinical trials.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right. Thanks, Julio, very much. A lot of good information. I learned a few
Yes.
things. Thank you very much for sharing all this with us.
My pleasure, Vid. Thank you for having me here.
Sure. Thank you. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.